Welcome back to Horror Galaxy. Tonight I have 4 disturbing and scary winter camping in Appalachia horror stories for you. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because once you step onto the Horror Galaxy, you don't walk alone. I came back into camp with my legs burning and my lungs tight, rifle slung low, already running through the list in my head of what I needed to do before dark. And the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't strong. That was what made me stop. It was faint, like the memory of smoke clinging to old clothes. And it made no sense because I hadn't lit a fire since before dawn. I stood there, boots planted where the trail narrowed into the clearing, listening to my own breathing and staring at the fire ring. The stones were darkened again, not with old soot but with fresh heat. I knew the difference. Anyone who's spent enough nights out knows when a fire's been out for hours versus when it's been fed recently. I crouched and held my hands over the ring without touching it. Warmth rose up, gentle but unmistakable. I pulled my hands back fast, heart picking up. The snow around the ring was undisturbed. No boot marks, no scuffs, no drag lines from wood. I stood up slowly and looked around the clearing, forcing myself not to jump at every sound. My tent was where I left it. My pack leaned against the same tree. The deer I'd dressed that morning hung from the crossbar I'd rigged, stiff now, untouched. I walked a slow circle around the fire ring, eyes down, checking the snow. It was smooth except for my own tracks from earlier, the ones I recognized by the way my heel dug in deeper on my right foot. There were no others. None leading in, none leading out. I remember saying out loud, "That's not possible." Like if I heard my own voice it would settle things. It didn't. The warmth kept bleeding into the air, quiet and patient. I knelt again and pressed a finger to one of the stones. It was hot enough that I hissed and jerked back. Someone had fed that fire less than an hour ago. The first thought was that I'd made a mistake, that I'd forgotten. But I knew my habits. I was careful with fire, especially alone. I always drowned it until it hissed and steamed, then stirred the ash until nothing glowed. I'd done it that morning, I was sure. I could picture it. I could feel the cold water sloshing out of my canteen, the way the steam curled up and vanished. I scanned the tree line, rifle coming up without me deciding to do it. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding thin. "You lost." Nothing answered. No movement. Just the hush of the woods holding still the way they do sometimes, like they're listening back. I thought about packing up right then. It would have been smart. But daylight was already thinning, and Red Bird Hills aren't a place you want to bushwhack through after dark in winter. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe heat trapped under ash, maybe some odd reaction with the stones. I didn't believe it, but I needed something to hold on to. I fetched my canteen and poured water over the ring again. It steamed and hissed like it should have hours earlier. I stirred until my fingers ached from the cold and the heat was gone. When I was done, the stones were dead and black, and the smell of smoke thinned out. I stood there for a long moment, staring, then forced myself to move on with camp chores. I cooked fast, barely tasting the food, eyes lifting every few seconds to the dark between the trees. When full dark settled in, I locked myself into the routine I trusted. Rifle cleaned and loaded. Headlamp checked. Knife in reach. I crawled into my sleeping bag and lay there listening, telling myself that fear feeds on stillness. Sometime later, I don't know how long, the smell came back. It slid into the tent like a thought you don't want to finish. Smoke? Fresh. I sat up so fast my headlamp banged against the tent wall. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. I unzipped just enough to peer out. The fire ring glowed faintly, not with flame, but with a dull red warmth beneath the stones, like a bed of coals breathing. I stared frozen, my mind scrambling for explanations and finding none. I hadn't heard anyone move. I hadn't heard sticks crack or metal shift. It was just there, alive again. I crawled out, boots half on, rifle in my hands. The cold hit my face sharp enough to hurt. The glow faded as I watched, sinking back into darkness. But when I reached the ring and held my hands over it, the heat was there again, undeniable. My breath came fast, fogging my vision. That's enough, I muttered, to myself or to whoever might be listening. I poured the rest of my water over the ring, every last drop, until it was a soggy mess of ash and stone. I stood there shaking, listening, waiting for something to show itself. Nothing did. I didn't sleep after that. I sat with my back against a tree, rifle across my knees, watching the ring until my eyes burned. Hours passed. The woods stayed quiet. No glow returned. Eventually, dawn crept in, pale and thin. In the morning, I found the footprints. They weren't human. That was the first thing my brain latched onto. They were too wide, too deep, pressed straight down as if whatever made them had no heel. They formed a loose circle around the fire ring, stopping a few feet away, never crossing into the ash. There were no tracks leading to them. They just started there, perfect impressions in the snow, then ended the same way. I packed up in silence. I didn't eat. I didn't dress the deer. I left it hanging. As I shouldered my pack and took one last look at the clearing, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Under the fire ring stones, where the ash had been churned up, was a layer of older charcoal, arranged carefully, like someone had rebuilt the fire again, and again in the same pattern. I hiked out fast, not stopping until my legs shook. When I reached my truck, I sat behind the wheel and breathed until the world steadied. I went back weeks later with a ranger I trusted. The camp was gone. No ring, no ash. Just smooth ground and young saplings, like it had never been used. The ranger told me there were old stories about winter camps in those hills, about fires that called things in, about rules people forgot. I listened, nodded, and drove home. I haven't camped alone since, and I never leave a fire or ring behind, even cold, without making sure it's broken apart. Some things don't need much to wake up. I woke up with my cheek pressed into frozen ground because the sleeping pad had slid out from under me during the night, and the first thing I noticed wasn't the cold or the stiffness in my fingers. It was the way the tent door was no longer facing downhill. I sat up fast, heart kicking, breath coming sharp, and stared at the zipper. Yesterday, when I pitched the tent, I had lined it up carefully so the entrance faced the logging road below. That was on purpose. You don't point a winter tent uphill unless you want wind and snow drifting straight inside. Now the door was facing sideways, angled toward the ridge I'd been mapping, the one the locals had gone quiet about when I asked its name. At first I told myself I must have misremembered. Sleep does strange things to your sense of direction. I crawled out, boots half laced, and checked my compass hanging from the tent loop. The needle settled. The ridge was exactly where the door pointed. I walked a slow circle around the tent, crunching frost, looking for drag marks or scuffed soil. There were none. The ground around the tent was undisturbed, like it had always been this way. I felt stupid standing there, shivering, arguing with my own memory. I rotated the tent back myself, planting my boots and twisting until the door faced downhill again. It took real effort. The tent wasn't light. I told myself I'd check it in the morning and crawled back inside. I didn't sleep much after that. Every sound made me tense. Branches shifting, distant cracking, my own breath. When dawn came gray and thin, I forced myself to calm down. I was here for a reason. Graduate field study. Structural mapping. The ridge mattered because the rock formations didn't match the surrounding area. That was interesting. That was why I was here. Not because of stories. I packed up my gear, took readings, and worked until my fingers ached. Around midday, I met an older man down by the road, while I was marking a waypoint. He had a truck parked crooked, engine idling. He watched me longer than necessary before speaking. "You camping up there?" he asked. I nodded. He looked past me up toward the ridge. "Which side you face?" I hesitated, then said, "Downhill." He nodded slowly, like that mattered. "Keep it that way." "What's on the ridge?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shut his truck door harder than needed. "Nothing you need." He drove off before I could ask more. That should have been my cue to leave. Instead, I laughed it off in my head and went back to work. That night, I woke to the sound of fabric shifting, not flapping. Sliding, I lay perfectly still, listening. The tent wasn't shaking. It felt like the ground under me was turning, slow and steady, like something was rotating a plate beneath my body. My stomach tightened. I reached out and pressed my palm flat to the ground. The sensation stopped immediately, silence. I didn't move again until morning. The door faced the ridge. This time there was no denying it. My compass confirmed it. The tent stakes were still driven straight, not pulled or loosened. No marks. No sign of movement. I felt my chest tighten, breath shallow, a low panic buzzing under my skin. I rotated the tent back again, harder this time, anger creeping in. I drove the stakes deeper. I tied extra guy lines. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Thermal expansion, ground shift, slope settling, anything. That day, the ridge felt closer. That's the only way I can describe it. Not physically, but mentally. Every time I looked up, my eyes went there without meaning to. I caught myself orienting my body toward it while I worked, turning without noticing. Once, when I realized it, I felt embarrassed, like I'd been caught staring at someone. By evening, I was exhausted. I ate quickly, crawled into the tent, and zipped the door shut with more force than necessary. I left the compass hanging where I could see it. Sometime after midnight, I woke with the certainty that I was no longer alone in my thoughts. There was no sound, no movement, just the feeling of a tension, heavy and patient. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it could be heard outside. I stared at the compass. The needle wavered, then slowly turned inch by inch, until it pointed directly at the ridge. I hadn't moved. The tent hadn't moved yet. I whispered, "No," out loud, and felt ridiculous for it. The turning started after that. It wasn't fast. It wasn't violent. It was careful. The ground didn't scrape. The fabric didn't strain. It felt like the world was politely rearranging itself around me. I grabbed my pack, shoved my boots on, and cut my way out of the tent with my knife, fabric tearing loud and final. The moment my feet hit the ground, the sensation stopped. I didn't sleep again. I sat with my back against a tree until dawn, watching the ridge without blinking. In the morning, I packed to leave. I didn't care about unfinished data. I didn't care about deadlines. I just wanted distance. As I hauled my pack downhill, I passed the same man from before, his truck parked in the same spot. He looked at the ripped tent slung over my shoulder. "It turned, didn't it?" he said. I nodded, throat tight. "How many times?" "3. He exhaled slowly. "That's about right." I asked him what was on the ridge. He shook his head. "It's not what's on it," he said. "It's what it points to." "What does it point to?" He looked at me then, really looked. "You don't want to be what it chooses to face." I left that day and didn't come back for weeks. When I finally returned with a professor and proper permits, the ridge looked ordinary. The formations still didn't match, but nothing felt wrong. We found old anchors drilled into the rock, rusted and half buried, evidence of previous camps, always aligned the same away, facing away. I finished my degree somewhere else. I still dream sometimes of slow turning, of careful hands that never touch. I don't camp anymore. And I never sleep without checking which way I'm facing, because I learned something out there that winter. Some places don't move toward you. They wait for you to turn. I was tightening the last loose bolt on the trail sign when I realized the woods had gone quiet in that way that makes your shoulders tense before your brain catches up. I stood there longer than I should have, fingers numb, listening, then forced myself to breathe and pack the wrench away. The campsite was only a short walk downhill, and I told myself I was tired. That silence didn't mean anything. Still, I kept glancing over my shoulder as I walked back, boots crunching into snow that had fallen clean and untouched since dusk. The tent came into view exactly where I'd left it, low and dull against the white. What stopped me was the ring around it. Footprints. A full circle of them, pressed deep, each step careful and evenly spaced, like someone had paced slowly around my camp while I was gone. I stood there staring, my breath fogging my face, trying to decide whether the tracks were fresh or old, whether they belonged to me somehow. They didn't. I hadn't walked that path, and the snow inside the circle was smooth, like the prints had been made after the last snowfall. I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I liked. No answer. I walked the circle, following the prints with my eyes. They didn't cross. They didn't come from anywhere. They just existed, a closed loop, ending where they began. I checked my own boot soles, pressing them beside one of the prints. Similar size, not exact. The stride was wrong, too measured. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in my bag listening to the faint rasp of wind through the trees, convincing myself over and over that trail maintenance crews sometimes overlap, that someone could have wandered through. When morning came, gray and dull, I unzipped the tent fast, bracing myself. The snow was clean, completely smooth. No footprints, no circle, just my tent sitting alone like nothing had happened. I laughed, sharp and embarrassed, the sound breaking out of me before I could stop it. Of course the snow had filled them in. That's what snow does. I ate a cold breakfast, packed my tools, and hiked out to the next section of trail, pushing the image out of my head. That night, it happened again. I came back late, shoulders aching, fingers stiff, and saw the circle immediately. Same distance from the tent, same careful spacing. I didn't call out this time. I crouched and studied them, heart beating harder the longer I looked. The snow inside the circle was untouched again, like the ground had been protected somehow. I followed the prints one by one, counting steps without meaning to. 23. Same as the night before. I backed into the tent, zipped it shut, and sat there with my head in my hands. I told myself I'd radio in the morning. I told myself to stay calm. I slept in short, shallow bursts, waking every time the fabric shifted. Morning erased everything again. Perfectly smooth snow. I stood there longer this time, waiting for fear or relief to win. Neither did. What I felt instead was watched, like the clearing was paying attention to how long I hesitated. By the third night, I started leaving markers. A dropped glove, a tool placed carefully just outside the tent door. Each morning, they were exactly where I'd left them, half buried, no signs of disturbance. The footprints still came. The snow still swallowed them by dawn. I radioed the coordinator from a ridge the next afternoon. My voice shook when I described it, and I hated that. He paused longer than I liked before telling me. Maybe elk were circling the scent of food. Maybe my own tracks were confusing me in low light. He suggested finishing the assignment early if I was uncomfortable. His tone made it clear he didn't think anything was actually wrong. That night, I stayed awake. I lay there counting breaths, staring at the faint outline of the tent wall. Hours passed, my muscles cramped. Sometime after midnight, I heard it. Not footsteps, weight, pressure. The soft, careful compression of snow, one step at a time. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I listened as the sound traveled around me, slow and patient. When it stopped, I waited for it to continue. It didn't. Something brushed the tent fabric near my head. Not a grab. Just a touch, light enough that I could pretend it was the wind if I wanted to lie to myself. I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered no barely louder than a breath. The sound faded. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under. Morning came. I unzipped the tent with shaking hands. The circle was there, but this time one set of footprints broke away from it. Just one, leading straight to my tent door. The last print stopped inches from the zipper. I sat down hard, my legs giving out. I stared at that final print, my mind racing through explanations that fell apart as soon as I touched them. No tracks led away. Just the circle and the single path to me. I packed in a frenzy, hands clumsy, gear thrown wherever it fit. I didn't eat. I didn't check the trail. I shouldered my pack and started downhill, boots sinking deep. After a few steps, I stopped. There were no footprints behind me. I turned slowly. The snow where I'd walked was already smoothing over, edges softening, filling in as if time itself was moving wrong. Panic rose sharp and hot in my chest. I broke into a run, lungs burning. Slipping and catching myself, watching my own tracks fade seconds after I made them. The trees thinned near the service road. I stumbled out, gasping, and dropped my pack. The gravel was bare, solid. Real. My prints stayed there, dark and undeniable. I waited an hour before looking back up the trail. There were no tracks leading out of the woods. I quit the volunteer program a week later. I told them it was exhaustion, family stuff. Anything that didn't sound like fear. Years passed. I told myself I'd imagined it, that stress and isolation had warped my perception. Last winter, I found my old field notebook while cleaning. Inside, tucked between maps, was a page I didn't remember writing. A careful sketch of a circle. 23 marks. One line breaking away. At the bottom, in my handwriting, were words I still don't remember thinking. Snow fills what it takes. Stay where it leaves you. I closed the notebook and put it back in the box. I don't camp in winter anymore. I don't walk in fresh snow unless I have to. And sometimes, when I wake in the night, I swear I can feel the ground around me listening, waiting to see if I'll move. I woke up choking on cold air and fabric, my hands already clawing at the inside of the tent before my brain caught up. The zipper was open again. I felt it immediately, the way the air slid across my face instead of staying trapped, the way the wall near my head sagged inward like something had brushed it aside. I yanked my sleeping bag tighter and sat up, heart hammering, staring at the dark opening. I hadn't unzipped it. I knew that with the same certainty I knew my own name. I scrambled for my headlamp, knocked it over, swore under my breath, then finally snapped it on. The beam cut across the tent wall, the gear piled near my feet, and then the open door. The zipper was all the way down to the floor, clean and deliberate, like someone had opened it carefully from the inside and left it that way. I leaned forward and ran my fingers along the teeth. No snag, no broken pull, nothing to explain it. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I told myself it was condensation or my knee or some half-awake movement I couldn't remember. I told myself a lot of things, but none of them stuck. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for hours. I pulled the zipper closed, listening to the sound echo too loudly in the quiet, and checked the time on my watch by touch alone. I didn't turn the lamp back on. I didn't want to see the opening again. When I finally lay back down, sleep didn't come. Every small shift of the tent fabric made me flinch. Every sound felt closer than it should have. I lay there replaying the last few hours, the way I always did during endurance challenges, cataloging my decisions. I had pitched the tent well before dark. I had staked it tight. I had zipped the door fully. I remembered doing it. I remembered pressing the zipper pull down and tucking it into the little flap meant to keep drafts out. I remembered because I was careful, because this mattered to me. This wasn't my first cold weather challenge. I had done plenty, some alone, some with groups. I knew my limits. I knew how exhaustion could play tricks on you, how stress could warp memory. But this didn't feel like that. This felt wrong in a way that sat deep in my gut, heavy and insistent. When morning finally came, I was already awake. I sat there waiting for light to seep through the fabric, afraid to move too much in case I discovered something else had changed. When I did unzip the tent myself, slowly and deliberately, I half expected resistance, like the zipper would fight me. It didn't. Outside, everything looked exactly as it should. No footprints near the tent, no disturbed gear, no sign of anyone or anything else having been there. I went through my routine on autopilot. I packed and unpacked items I didn't need to, just to feel busy. I checked my stove, my fuel, my boots. I drank water even though it tasted flat and wrong. I told myself the first night didn't count. First nights never counted. You're always on edge the first night. I spent the day pushing myself the way the challenge demanded. Long stretches of movement, controlled breathing, deliberate exposure. I focused on the burn in my muscles and the steady rhythm of my steps. I needed to feel capable again. By the time I returned to camp, I was exhausted enough to believe I would sleep through anything. That night, I zipped the tent with almost ceremonial care. I pressed the zipper down, then back up, then down again, making sure it seated properly. I tucked the pull into the flap. I ran my hand along the seam. I even tied a short piece of cord from the zipper pull to a loop inside the tent, just in case. It felt paranoid, but it also felt necessary. I lay down and stared at the ceiling, counting my breaths until my thoughts slowed. When sleep came, it was deep and dreamless. I woke to the same cold slide of air across my face. My eyes snapped open. My hand flew to the zipper without hesitation this time, like my body had been waiting for it. The cord was still tied. The knot was still intact. The zipper was open anyway, pulled all the way down. The cord stretched taut and snapped. I sat there shaking, staring at the broken fibers dangling from the loop. The sound I made was half laugh, half sob. Sharp and ugly. I didn't want to be alone anymore. That was the thought that kept repeating. I didn't want to be alone. I turned on the headlamp and forced myself to look outside. Nothing. The same empty darkness. The same stillness. I listened hard, straining for any sound that didn't belong. My own breathing was too loud. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting upright with my back against the tent wall, watching the door. It didn't move again. Morning came, pale and unremarkable, like nothing had happened. I considered leaving. The thought was there, bright and tempting. I could call it. I had enough data, enough experience, enough sense to walk away. But there was another thought under that one, quieter and more stubborn. I needed to understand. I hated that about myself, but it was true. I needed to know what was happening, and I needed to know it wasn't just me losing control. That day, I set a test. I told myself it was rational, but it was the logical next step. I attached a small bell to the zipper pull, the kind meant for bear bags. I tied it securely and tested it over and over, opening and closing the door until the sound was unmistakable. There was no way the zipper could move without ringing. That night, I zipped the tent, rang the bell deliberately, then settled in with my headlamp off and my eyes open. I waited. Time stretched in strange ways. My thoughts drifted and snapped back. I fought the urge to check the zipper every few minutes. When sleep finally crept in, it was light and uneasy. I never heard the bell. I woke again to cold air, to the weightless feeling in my chest, to the certainty that something had happened without my awareness. The zipper was open. The bell was still tied on. It hung there silently, unmoved. I don't know how long I sat there staring at it. Eventually, anger burned through the fear. Hot, sharp grounding. I grabbed the bell and shook it hard. The sound was loud in the enclosed space, almost painful. I shook it again, then again, until my arm ached. I needed proof. I needed something to make sense. I packed up at first light. I didn't rush, but I didn't linger either. My hands moved with a tight efficiency. My thoughts focused on leaving. As I took down the tent, I noticed something that made me stop cold. The inside of the door fabric, near the zipper, was scuffed. Not torn, scuffed, like something rough had brushed against it repeatedly. I traced the marks with my fingers, feeling the faint texture. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. I remembered checking the tent when I set it up. It was new. This was new. I didn't sleep another night after that. I hiked out, my body heavy with fatigue and my mind buzzing with too many unanswered questions. When I got back to my car, the relief was overwhelming and short-lived. Because even surrounded by familiar sounds and solid ground, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something unresolved behind me. For weeks after, I tried to explain it away. Faulty zipper, user error, stress. But none of those explanations accounted for the cord, the bell, the scuffed fabric. None of them explained the way it felt, the specific wrongness of it. Eventually, I sent the tent back to the manufacturer. I didn't tell them the whole story. I just said there was an issue with the zipper. They sent it back with a note saying everything was functioning normally. No defects found. I almost threw it away then. I should have. Instead, I set it up in my backyard one afternoon, broad daylight, nothing but open space around me. I zipped the door and sat inside watching, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing happened. I felt foolish, relieved. I started to laugh at myself. Then I felt the zipper move. It was subtle, just a faint vibration through the fabric, but it was unmistakable. I froze, my breath caught halfway in. Slowly, deliberately, the zipper slid downward. The sound was soft, controlled, careful. The door opened outward, exactly the way it had in the woods. I was already moving when it finished, scrambling out of the tent, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I stood there staring at it, my hands shaking, the open door flapping gently in the breeze. I didn't keep that tent. I cut it apart and threw it away in pieces, scattered across different bins on different days. I never camped alone again. Not because I was afraid of the woods, or the cold, or the challenge. I was afraid of the certainty I felt in that moment, watching the zipper move without a hand. Whatever had been opening that tent didn't need the dark. It didn't need isolation. It didn't even need me to be tired or afraid. It just needed a way in.